Evangelism calls persons to commitment. Christian formation teaches the meaning of that commitment. Worship celebrates that commitment. Stewardship is the practice of that commitment. Discipleship that leads to apostolic action is the outcome of that commitment. Commitment. Today, we're proclaiming it as Commitment Sunday. This is the day when we're asking people if they have not already submitted a pledge card of support for God's work in the world through Christ Church to actually bring it. And I found this old church, which evidently goes back into the history. Somebody made it in 1974, and it was lost and it's been found. So we thought, what a great place to put the pledges when they come in, or maybe sometimes to take out home communion or something like that. This whole aspect of commitment, you may remember that back when we first were talking about the pledge cards going out in the mail, I started a sermon with these same 5 points. The point being that stewardship and money are not the same thing. Aspects of it, commitment, transformation. Jesus is talking about commitment, about an understanding of commitment, about an understanding of relationship with God, with the holy, when he is sitting across from the treasury and he's pointing out to his disciples how some rich people are acting and how the poor widow is acting by giving literally all that she had. Now, the interesting thing is, he is not saying that the rich people in this story have acted inappropriately. They've done what they've been taught to do. They have probably made a tithe, and it came out of perhaps a large sum. Now, where they got the money from, he alludes to earlier on when he talks about the way the Pharisees devour the poor widow's earnings, but that might necessarily not deal with the rich people in the story who were putting the money in there. It may not have been them. The point about the commitment is, how do you understand where the money comes from? You may remember at some point over the last few weeks, we also heard the story of the rich young ruler. Now, this is the rich young man who really knew the words to the law, and he wanted to follow Jesus. And when asked what it would take to follow Jesus, he was told, go and sell all that you have. But he was a man with many possessions, and he could not sell what he had, and he walked away. But I also pointed out that in that story, Jesus loved him. And I've pointed out elsewhere that that is also my story, how easy it is to walk away when asked to sell all that you have. And I'd like to think maybe at some point I finally understood that selling all that I had meant remembering one thing. All that I have comes from God. This is what Jesus is trying to teach. The poor widow, I believe, understands that all that she has comes from God, and she returns to God all that she has, and yet she is still taken care of. Her needs appear to be met. She is incredibly faithful. And so there's a distinction here. It has a little bit to do with understanding what it is to live out of a sense of abundance. Where does the abundance come from? Well, it all comes from God. And if we're going to focus on abundance as riches, prosperity and money, that's one place to stay. But try to remember this. I think in the end, this is what Jesus is trying to have his disciples understand, and what I'd like us to hear. That while it's well and good to put 10% into the treasury of the church, and by the way, we like that. That's a good thing, okay? The point is, don't think that the other 90% is yours. It's not 90% is mine and 10% is God's. Go sell all that you have. All of it is God's. It's how well you manage it for God, which was the point of the Pearl of Great Price story I told back in September. So how do you get a discipline in your life to understand that all that you have is from God, and you're called to manage it, to be God's steward. What is it to sell all that you have, receive it all back from God, and then manage it for God? How do you get a discipline like that? Well, as you know, we're in the midst of first intentional communion training for our younger people, grades 2 through 6, and they have been through a training about money. Because when you're dealing with money, frankly, you're dealing with reality, you're dealing with maturity. And if you recall, they came together and we started off by drawing pictures. And I asked the young people to draw pictures of what they spend their money on. Now, when you're in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, or 6th grade, what you spend money on is rather whatever you'd like, frankly. And then I asked them to draw pictures of what mom and dad spend money on. And it turns out that mom and dad spend money on a lot different things as well, such as the house, the car, education, food. It was pretty interesting how fast the money got used up to take care of the children, to take care of the needs that God had entrusted the parents to do for the children and for, well, their own lives as well. So then it was like, okay, now let's figure out how we can apply this to our own lives. If you've ever looked at some of the Gladware in the stores, there are bigger ones that you can put like a fairly good-sized bowl of soup in or a sandwich in, and then the small ones that you can put applesauce in. So what I've done is I've taken the bigger ones and I've cut a slot in the top, and I take the smaller ones, 2 slots in the top, and I presented the children with 3 plastic containers, 1 big one and 2 small ones. And then I gave them a bag filled with dimes, 10 dimes. 10 dimes is a dollar, thank you. Usually when you do that with adults, they go, I wasn't ready for the thinking and counting part. Okay, it's $1. And the idea is say, oh, I gave you labels, didn't I? I gave them labels. And one label went on the big, bank, the big container, and it said 80% spending. And then one label, a smaller label, went on one of the smaller ones. It said 10% savings. And then the other one was 10% giving. And we took the dimes and we spread them out. 8 went into the big bank and 1 each into the smaller banks so we could begin to understand. You know, it's kind of nice when you get used to doing this early on in your life, spending within that 80% framework, and then having a little bit of money set aside for just in case something happens, you need it, and always having enough to honor whatever God would have you do as a base, giving into the world. If you're like me, I'm still struggling to get to the 10% part. I'm getting closer, but I didn't come at it till it was too late. I'd already spent too much of the money. So I didn't have the advantage of this discipline early on. So now, I then gave them their final test. And their test was this. I gave them each a paper dollar bill. Now, paper dollar bill is the same amount as, that's right, 10 dimes. And the idea was, what do you do with the paper dollar bill? Well, eventually, smart ones there, figured out you put the paper dollar bill in the big bank, the 80% bank, but you have to then take 2 dimes out from the big bank and put 1 more in savings, 1 more in giving. So now you're left with how much to spend? $1.60, which is a much better lesson than when I used to do it with pennies. So I know the children appreciate that much more. But it also helps us begin to understand what is it to have this discipline. Now, there were a couple of children in the class, none in church with me right now, I guarantee you. One of them was having a very hard time with the idea of what to do with all the money, and he wanted to put it all in giving, which I said, that is fantastic. That's your money. You can put it all in giving. And then there was another one who wanted to put it all in savings. And they said, you've missed the point. You can put all but 20%. See, the 10% needs to go, the 2 dimes, they had to stay in giving. That's the idea of living into the discipline. It's hard when we are faced with the idea of Jesus saying, I came and they might have life and have it in abundance. And Jesus also says this. He says this part in Luke. Too much has been given, much is expected. So if we keep thinking about abundance as solely money, well, if we have it, much is expected as to what we're to do with it. It's a wonderful thing when you have a good discipline and some ideas of what to do with it. But there's also another aspect of abundance which really speaks to the true relationship that Jesus proclaims. Because Jesus didn't come to just give us things. Jesus came to be in relationship with us. At the close of Matthew's gospel, Jesus says, and lo, I will be with you to the end of the ages. When I hear the word abundance in that framework, I move beyond money, possessions, and things to the fullness of everything that's part of life, which is easy to focus on when it's the good stuff. But abundance also means everything, the hard stuff, the painful stuff, the worrisome stuff. Jesus is in that with us. That's the mark of the cross. So when we're called to be faithful stewards, we're called to participate with him in everything, carefully remembering that all that we have comes from God, and how we use it honors the relationship so freely offered to each and every one of us. All these words I offer in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.